Hi, Assalamualaikum. In this news, we are going to talk about inflation in South Africa. South Africa inflation has been persistently higher than in other market economies. It was started in 1960 until now. South Africa is a mixed economy generating most of its GDP, which is gross domestic price, through the services sector, especially tourism. However, the country struggles with unemployment and poverty. Inflation has generally been trending downwards globally and more so recently in South Africa, where prices have been sticky in the past decade. So, we will directly see how the inflation in South Africa. Inflation is defined as a persistent and sustained increase in the aggregate or average price level of goods and services in an economy. And inflation implies that there is an increase in the cost of living that causes lower purchasing power. It is a situation where there is too much money chasing too few goods. There is thus an inverse relationship between inflation and the value of money. When inflation is high, the value of money will be lower and vice versa. Vice versa indicates that a statement is equally true when its subjects and objects are switched. With inflation, there is a loss of value of a currency because the consumer's money now will be not buy as much as it could. Inflation in South Africa is measured using the Consumer Price Index, which is CPI, which is the average spending or living cost of a person. The CPI is calculated by totaling the cost of predetermined basket of goods and services as used by an average South African, and inflation is calculated by then measuring the rise in the price of this basket over 12 months. This is always expressed as a percentage. The annual inflation rate in South Africa fell to 4.1% in March of 2020 from 4.6% in February, and below market expectation of 4.3%. It was the lowest inflation rate since last December, as prices slowed mostly for transport, 3.4% to 6.2% in February, namely falls from 5.5% to 12.7% on the back of falling oil prices amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Inflation was driven by a 14% increase in gasoline prices in February compared with the same month last year, but it is expected to moderate over the coming months on the back of a sharp decline in oil prices. Meanwhile, inflation edged higher food and non-alcoholic beverages from 4.4% to 4.2%, housing and utilities from 4.8% to 4.7%, and miscellaneous goods and services from 6.4% to 6.3%. On a monthly basis, consumer prices went up 0.3%, easing from a 1% rise in the prior month and compared with a market consensus of a 0.5% increase.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. I will present you about problem that South Africa face due to inflation. According to this inflation, there are many problems that South Africa face. First, from their economy. So, according to our investigation, the economy didn't make any much of an increase in their economy. Over the last decade, the South African economy has grown at an average annual rate of 1.4%. An emerging economy should be able to manage much better than that, perhaps something close to 5%. South Africans' growth in the last few years has weakened to such an extent that is lower than the increase in population. Gross domestic product per person, which is a rough and ready indicator of average living standards, has declined. So, how is wealth is distributed? The employment rate is worse than 1 in 4. The degree of inequality is extraordinary, a measure that's often used in the Gini coefficient, which ranges theoretically between 0 for complete equality and 100 where all the income goes to a single person. In the most equal countries, Nordic and some other European countries, the figure is in the mid to high 20s. For the UK, it's in the mid 30s and the US around 40. For South Africa, it's more than 60. So for their energy sector, there are some key energy services that business need that are ripe for improvement, notably energy transport and telecommunications. State-owned enterprises are key players in these areas, and the International Monetary Fund has called for steps to make it easier for private sector suppliers to get involved. The IMF says availability of power is no longer a constraint on economic activity, but more competition for the state-owned utility will be useful. It could help reduce prices. In transport, one specific issue mentioned by the IMF is that port tariffs are high, and also the allocation of broadband spectrum has been a problem. The IMF also pressed for labour market reform to make it easier for young people to get their job and give small firms more flexibility. So, from that, how is land reform working out? For land reform is an area which will be hard to resolve. Here in South Africa's trouble history is in the air. Enabling the black majority to own land was always an important principle. So, for Mr. Ramaphosa's ruling African National Congress, but in practice it has been controversial and wasted by problems. Much of the land that has been redistributed is now unproductive. How to address that will be important question for the new president. As a warning for how wrong reform can go if it's done badly. There is the disastrous example of neighboring Zimbabwe, where it led to a collapse of agriculture and contribute to hyperinflation.
Every inflation has their own effect. Either it was a long-term effect or it was a short-term effect. Before we proceed to the topic effect of inflation to South Africa, we really need to know that the effect of inflation can be divided into two parts, which is effect to the people and effect to the country. First of all, I want to explain an effect towards the people in South Africa. Detailed income profiles for different income groups are not available in South Africa, but the BMR surveys to provide income profiles for blacks in general. Basically, there is no reason to expect that the lower income group will necessarily be faced with a higher rate of inflation than any other group. So, the low income people suffered to keep themselves survive in daily life. This is because the higher rate of inflation makes export seem relatively expensive. People in this group can afford much to buy daily needs as a human. Indirectly, the rate of people in South Africa who suffers kwashiorkor increase per month. This is because the lack of protein intake by them in the balanced diet. Inflation also can cause fixed income earners suffered with wages because the value of earners will be reduced by their own company. Besides the bad effect, they also have positive effects towards some groups. If you have a fixed rate mortgage, you will benefit from inflation. This is because the value of your monthly mortgage payments will decrease over time. Your payment might be fixed 1,500 per month for 30 years. But since the value of that 1,500 decreases over that 30-year period, it will feel like you are paying less. That's assuming your income has grown along with the rate of inflation. Next, we are going to discuss effect of inflation in South Africa towards the country. The country's economic growth has been stagnating over the last 10 years. This is due to the multitude of issues arising as a result of the growing pains of a new nation. Most recently, discontent and striking in the mineral resources sector, failed service delivery, protests, and inefficient job creation strategies have dealt South Africa's economy a heavy blow. A mild inflation promotes economic growth, but a runaway inflation obstructs economic growth as it raises costs of development projects. When the economy is in crisis, then the money value also will drop drastically. Besides that, the government revenue increase as it gets more revenue from income tax, sales tax, excise duties, and others. Similarly, public expenditure increases as the government is required to spend more and more for administrative and other purposes. Next, inflation also increases the rate of unemployment in this country, where the uncertainty of inflation leads to lower investment and lower economic growth in the long term.
Monetary policy. Monetary policy is defined as the demand side of economic policy, refers to the actions undertaken by a nation's central bank to control money supply to achieve macroeconomic goals that promote sustainable economic growth. Monetary policy can be broadly classified as either expansionary or contractionary. Monetary policy tools include open market operations, direct lending to banks, bank reserve requirements, unconventional emergency lending programs, and managing market expectations, which subject to the central bank's credibility. Monetary policy consists of the process of drafting, announcing, and implementing the plan of actions taken by the central bank, currency board, or other competent monetary authority of a country that controls the quantity of money in an economy and the channels by which new money is supplied. Monetary policy consists of management of money supply and interest rates aimed at achieving macroeconomic objectives such as controlling inflation, consumption, growth, and liquidity. These are achieved by actions such as modifying the interest rate, buying or selling government bonds, regulating foreign exchange rates, and changing the amount of money banks are required to maintain as reserves. Inflation has been recognized by the South African monetary and fiscal authorities as an evil of many occasions. Not surprisingly, therefore, the Dean Cock Commission in its final report entitled The Monetary System and Monetary Policy in South Africa, which was submitted in May 1985, stated that in the long term, the primary objective of monetary policy should be the maintenance of reasonable stability of the domestic price level. One, in accordance with this and related recommendation in the Commission's report, Article 3 of the new South Africa Reserve Bank Act 1989, Act No. 90 of 1989, which came into effect on 1 August 1989, stipulated that the pursuance of monetary stability and balanced economic growth shall rank as the primary objective of the bank's action in the bank's exercise of its power and the performance of its duties.
How South Africa overcome inflation crisis using monetary policy. The primary objective of monetary policy in South Africa is to achieve and maintain price stability in the interest of sustainable and balanced economic development and growth. Price stability reduces uncertainty in the economy and therefore provides a favorable environment for growth and employment creation. Furthermore, low inflation contributes to the protection of the purchasing power of all South Africans, particularly the poor who have no means of defending themselves against continually rising prices. The bank has full operational autonomy. Monetary policy is set by the bank's Monetary Policy Committee (MPC), which conducts monetary policy within a flexible inflation targeting framework. This allows for inflation to be out of the target range as a result of first-round effects of a supply shock and for the bank to determine the appropriate time horizon for restoring inflation to within the target range. This flexibility does not relieve the bank of its responsibility with respect to returning inflation to within the target range but allows for the interest rate smoothing over the cycle, which may mitigate any output variability from the monetary policy response to the shock. There are a number of key roles that the bank plays in the management of South African money and banking system. These are formulation and implementation of monetary policy. The bank is responsible for the monetary policy of South Africa. Monetary policy can be defined as the measure taken by monetary authorities to influence the quantity of money and the rate of interest in a country with a view to achieving stable prices and facilitating full employment and sustainable economic growth. South Africa's money South Africa's monetary policy is conducted within an inflation targeting framework, and the refinancing system is the mechanism used by the bank for the implementation of monetary policy. Second one is banknotes and coin. The Reserve Bank has the sole right to make, issue, and destroy banknotes and coins in South Africa. The SA Mint Company, a subsidiary of the bank, mints all the coins on behalf of the Reserve Bank. The SA Banknote Company, another subsidiary of the bank, prints all banknotes on behalf of the bank. The Reserve Bank is responsible for the wholesale distribution of banknotes and coins, whereas banks distribute banknotes and coins to their branch office to ensure availability to the public. In order to perform this function, the Reserve Bank has 7 branch offices in Bloemfontein, Cape Town, Durban, East London, Johannesburg, Port Elizabeth, and Pretoria North. These branches are responsible for ensuring the availability and an adequate supply of good quality notes to meet the public's demand and to replace soil notes. The branches also settle claims for multilateral banknotes. The branches of the bank, the South African Police Service, and the commercial banks also work together to combat the counterfeiting of banknotes. The next one is settlement of interbank claims. The Reserve Bank provides for final real-time electronic settlement of interbank obligation emanating from non-cash payment, example checks made in the economy, via the South African Multiple Option Settlement (SAMO) system. In addition, the bank oversees the safety and soundness of the payment system through the introduction of settlement risk reduction measures as and when required. The settlement risk reduction measures are aimed at minimizing possible systemic risk emanating from inter alia, the settlement default ability or lack of funds to settle obligation of one or more settlement banks. The last one is bank supervision. The Reserve Bank is responsible for bank regulation and supervision in South Africa. The purpose is to achieve a sound, efficient banking system in the interest of depositors of banks and the economy as a whole. This function is performed by issuing banking license to banking institutions and monitoring their activities in terms of either the Bank Act or the Mutual Bank Act and related regulation.